I spent 1 month traveling through Vietnam, not rushing from place to place, not trying to see everything, but moving slowly and letting each place show itself in its own way, with the goal to capture the Vietnam that we usually don't get to see. The city wakes up early. Before the sun fully rises, the streets are already alive, but not in a loud way. It feels gradual, like the city stretches awake instead of jumping into the day. You hear scooters starting one by one, metal shutters opening, the quiet clatter of dishes being washed somewhere out of sight. People sit on small plastic stools, drinking coffee, talking softly, watching the street before it fully fills. There's something steady about the mornings here. Not slow, not fast, just steady. Walking through Hanoi feels different than other cities. The streets are narrower, the buildings older, walls stained by time, wires hanging overhead in thick bundles. Everything feels layered, like the city has been building itself, on top of itself, for decades, without ever stopping. You pass small shops that are barely wider than a doorway. People cooking on the sidewalk, families eating breakfast together, just a few feet from traffic. Nothing feels separated. Life spills onto the streets naturally, as if there was never meant to be a boundary. At first, you notice the noise scooters, voices, engine, footsteps. But after a while, it stops sounding like noise and starts sounding like rhythm. Certain streets are always busy, others quiet. Corners where people gather every morning like clockwork. Vendors setting up in the same places. Customers arriving at the same time every day. The city doesn't feel random, it feels practiced. By late morning, the heat starts to settle in. The light becomes harsher, shadows shorten, and people move differently, slower, more quietly. Cafes filled with people escaping the sun, fans spinning overhead, glasses sweating on tables. You sit for a while and just watch. People passing, conversations happening, the street continuing, whether you pay attention or not.
Wow, bravo! Come on, wow.
Hanoi doesn't demand anything from you, doesn't try to impress you. It just exists, and the longer you stay, the more comfortable that feels. In the afternoon, the pace changes again. Markets grow busier, scooters return in waves, and sidewalks fill with activity. It feels like the city breathes in cycles rather than moving at one constant speed. You walk through small alleys where sunlight barely reaches the ground, past houses where doors are open and life inside is visible just for a second as you pass. A television playing, someone cooking, a child doing homework on the floor. Nothing feels staged. Everything feels real in a way that's hard to explain until you're inside it. As evening approaches, the air cools slightly and the streets feel again, but in a different way. People gather to eat, to talk, to sit outside. Lights turn on, reflections appear on wet pavement. The sound of conversation replaces the harshness of the daytime traffic. And after a while, it stops feeling like you're just passing through. You're not new in the city anymore. You have been here for some time, walking like you have done it 100 times already, turning left and right without checking a map, letting the streets unfold in front of you without knowing where they lead. After a few days in Hanoi, it was time to leave. There's a city in southern Vietnam that doesn't really feel like a city. On paper, it's loud, crowded, chaotic. Millions of people, endless traffic, constant noise. Once you're here, the description feels incomplete. It feels closer to a small town that never learned how to slow down. Not because it's quiet, but because it feels familiar. Because people notice you. You walk down the street and eyes meet yours. Not in a suspicious way, just acknowledgement. A smile, a nod, someone stepping aside without saying a word. You don't feel like you're passing through something foreign. You feel like you're being allowed to exist inside it. The city is busy, constantly moving, but it never feels aggressive. There's density everywhere. People, scooters, shops stacked on top of each other. Yet, there's space in the way people treat you. No urgency to push you out the way. No sense that you're in the wrong place. Movement is the first thing that really sinks in. Buses fill the streets from every direction, sometimes crossing lanes that barely exist, sometimes beeping to signal they're overtaking. From the outside, it feels chaotic, but if you look closer, you realize there's a sense in all of it. Everyone here is paying attention, not necessarily to the rules, but to each other. As lights shift at a handle, a pause, a glance. The entire system works because everyone is adjusting all the time. You learn quickly that hesitation is more dangerous than confidence. You step forward and the city moves around you. Crossing the street feels like a leap at first. Cars, scooters, buses flowing past without slowing down. Then you take a step, then another, and suddenly you're part of the rhythm. Nothing stops, but nothing hits you either. It's a language you don't speak yet, but you start recognizing the patterns. You cannot translate it. After a while, you kind of just feel it. And then you stop standing out. Not because you disappear, but because nobody treats you like you don't belong. You order coffee, point at food you don't recognize, sit down on plastic chairs that spill onto the sidewalk. Nobody asks questions. Nobody stares.
You have a big tree, but you also have some flowers in color.
Communication happens without much effort. A hand motion, a raised eyebrow, a small laugh. Conversations don't always use words, but they still get you where you need to go. You learn that understanding isn't always verbal. Sometimes intention is enough. The city rebuilds itself slowly. Morning streets filled with coffee cups and parked scooters. Afternoons where the heat settles into everything. Evenings when lights turn on and sidewalks become shared spaces. You start noticing details that were invisible at first. Clothes hanging above narrow alleys. Flags fixed to balconies, faded by sun and rain. Shops that close, open again. Change purpose without explanation.
I don't think so.
Nothing here feels arranged for someone watching from the outside. Everything feels used, lived in, adjusted day by day. There's no clear boundary between private and public life. Homes spill onto the street. Streets become places to sit, talk, eat, wait. The city feels less like something built and more like something agreed upon. Days pass without a strong sense of separation. Mornings turn into afternoons without you even noticing it. The night doesn't shut the city down, it just softens it. The sound changes, the pace loosens slightly. You realize that the city doesn't demand attention, doesn't perform, it just continues. And if you stay long enough, you stop observing it like a visitor. At some point, you catch yourself moving without thinking, crossing streets instinctively, recognizing faces without knowing names, finding your way back without checking for directions. That's when the city stops being something you look at. It becomes something you move through. Ho Chi Minh City doesn't ask you to understand it. It doesn't try to explain itself. It lets you find your place inside the flow at your own pace. And if you give it time, it gives you something quiet in return. A sense that even in all this movement, there is room for you to be here. You kind of just start existing inside it. After the noise and movement of the cities, I headed to Phu Quoc. The change is immediate. The air feels heavier, warmer, carrying the smell of salt and wood, and something faintly sweet from the trees along the shore. You don't hear the traffic anymore, not in the same way at least. The loudest sound is usually the wind or the water, and it takes a while for your ears to adjust to the kind of quiet. I spend most of my time in a small fishing village. From a distance, it looks simple, almost still. Boats resting near the shore, nets hanging from wooden frames, houses close together, painted in colors faded by the heat. But the longer you stay, the more movement you notice. People repairing engines, cleaning fish, carrying baskets, talking quietly in the shade. Nothing here feels rushed. Work gets done, but it happens at a pace that feels steady instead of urgent. Conversations last longer. People stop what they're doing to talk, to sit, to watch the water for a while before continuing. You start to notice things you wouldn't normally notice. The sound of rope sliding against wood, the creak of a boat shifting slightly with the tide, sand stuck to your feet, warm from the sun. Walking through the village, you realize how open everything is. Doors left open, windows uncovered, life visible from the outside in a way that feels natural. Everybody is working for each other. Someone cooks, while a radio plays softly in the background. Time feels less divided, less structured, like the day is one continuous stretch rather than separate blocks. By afternoon, the heat becomes heavy. The air barely moves and everything slows. Streets grow quieter, voices softer, movement slower. Even the water feels calmer, like the entire place is resting for a few hours. And then the light begins to change. The sky fades slowly, the air cools just enough to notice, and the island starts to wake up again. Lights turn on one by one. Scooters appear, voices grow louder, and the night market begins to fill. The market feels alive, but not chaotic. Rows of stalls, bright lights, smoke rising from grills. People walking slowly, stopping often, talking, eating, walking around without any sense of hurry. You hear languages mixing together, music playing somewhere in the distance, the sound of oil sizzling, laughter, footsteps, conversations blending into a constant low hum. Nothing big happens, but somehow it feels like enough. Just being there in the middle of it all is the point. When I think back to Phu Quoc, this is what I remember most. Not a single moment, but the feeling of that island that just keeps going, like it doesn't want to end. Da Nang feels different from the moment you arrive. Wider streets, more open space, a sense of order that feels almost quiet compared to the density of the other cities. At night, the city shows its real character. As the sun begins to set, the light softens and the air gets cooler. Traffic continues, but it feels smoother, less intense. The river reflects the sky first, then the lights of the city as they begin to turn on. Walking along the waterfront at night, you notice how much space there is. Families, couples, groups of friends, everyone moving at a calm pace. The bridges begin to glow, colors shifting, reflections stretching across the surface of the river. Boats press quietly, leaving small waves that distort the lights for a moment before everything becomes still again. There's a calmness in Da Nang that isn't silent but steady. The sound of distant traffic, music from a cafe, voices carried by the wind, and the low hum of a city that never fully stops, but never overwhelms either. You walk without thinking about where you're going. One street leads to another, another leads to the river again, and you realize you've been moving in circles without noticing it. At night, the city feels larger than it does during the day. Open spaces, long roads, wide sidewalks, lights stretching into the distance. You can see further, hear further, breathe more easily. You start noticing details that only exist at night. Shadows stretching across the empty pavement, reflections in shop windows, the sound of footsteps echoing slightly in quieter streets. Hours pass without you realizing it. You keep walking, occasionally stopping, sometimes sitting, sometimes just standing still and watching people move past. Then slowly, the city begins to empty. Traffic thins, voices fade, lights remain but feels softer, less intense. The river becomes smoother, reflecting almost perfectly now that fewer boats pass. You realize we've been outside for hours, not searching for anything, not following a plan, just existing in the rhythm of the night. And eventually, you head back. The streets quieter than before, the air cooler, the city still awake but calmer, like it's resting without fully sleeping.